Good morning, accounting students. So the next section that we're going to look at today is variable costing and cost volume profit. So this falls under the section of decision making as a function of cost and management accounting. We're going to go and have a look at the notes and which section these relates to. So if you're looking on page 7 of the notes, you will see there is a table at the bottom of page 7 that differentiates traditional versus variable costing. That leads into a couple of graphs and formulas, and then we have 2 examples. We'll probably just work through the first example, but the second example is a great example for you to try yourself. There are a couple of more advanced examples which we will have a look at in a separate mini video. But for now, we're going to go and look at the principles behind it and then look at the first example, which will be sufficient for your first quiz on this section. So we're going to go over and look at the screen and have a look at the differences between direct costing and traditional costing. So remember when we had the cost object, we said that with respect to the cost object, we have direct costs and indirect costs. The direct costs can be traced to the cost object, the indirect costs have to be allocated. However, we also noted that the direct costs tended to be variable, whereas the indirect costs tended to be fixed. Remember our 2 charts, okay? If we're looking at units produced and we're looking at dollars, fixed costs stay the same, whereas with more units produced, the variable costs will increase. The dollar amount will increase. So the way that we traditionally put together an income statement, we have revenue minus cost of goods sold gives us gross profit, minus operating costs gives us operating profit, or in this case, we can abbreviate that as net profit. And that's the traditional way of producing an income statement. It's also known as absorption costing, because the cost of goods sold is largely about manufacturing costs, and we are taking all the costs, certainly the manufacturing costs, both variable and fixed, and we are absorbing them into the cost object. Now, we don't do that in this alternative approach. This income statement is based on function, manufacturing, admin, and selling. The direct or variable costing income statement is based on behavior, fixed or variable. Okay, so we start with our revenue. That is followed by our variable costs in total, which if we subtract those gives us MI, which stands for marginal income, sometimes also known as contribution. We then go and subtract fixed costs, and that gives us our net profit. Now, if we assume we're producing one product and it has one selling price, and that product has one set of variable costs that go into producing it, and then just a group of fixed costs, we can go and reorganize this income statement. So we make, for example, the number of units we're producing X. If we redo this, we're going to have the revenue consisting of SP multiplied by S, where SP is the selling price. And then our total variable cost will consist of variable cost per unit multiplied by X, where VC is the little variable costs per unit. Together gives us the marginal income. If we subtract that from the revenue, then we subtract our fixed costs and we get our net profit. Okay, now, what's special about this income statement in this variable or direct costing format is we can go and reorganize it as an equation. And we have selling price minus variable costs multiplied by X. That minus that, we bring the X out, minus fixed cost is equal to net profit. And now I know in our last class we briefly went through this. If we look at this function, what type of function is it? Well, we have, I think in the US we talk about this as being B, this is being Y, and this is, I think you call it MX, or something like that. MX minus B is equal to Y. Okay, it's a straight line function. This is the gradient, and this is the intercept with the y-axis. So if we had to go and plot this on a chart, where we have 0 over here, and this dollar amount is the dollars for our profit. If we make no units, that amount is 0. So our profit at that stage is equal to a loss, equal to equivalent to your fixed costs. So we start off with the fixed cost down here as being your profit, which is a loss. And then as we make more units, it's a straight line function with a positive gradient, okay? And so it will go up. At this point, the profit is minus fixed costs. It's going to be below 0. So it's actually a loss situation. But once we hit 0 profit and start moving above that, we are into a real profit situation. And what's of particular interest to us is this specific point, which is known as the break-even point. So BE stands for break-even. It's where the profit is 0. Why is that important? Every organization needs to know how many products they need to sell, how many customers they have to have before they start making a profit. That is your minimum target. How do we know what amount that is? Well, if we take that equation and we make profit equal to 0 and we solve for X, okay, X will be, this is the break even. So X break even is equal to fixed costs divided by selling price minus variable costs. So that is your break even point. What can we do with this equation? Well, we can do lots of things with this equation. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go look at the class example. We'll get the numbers and we'll come back and we will play with them in this equation. We'll look at a couple of different scenarios. So if we switch over to that class example and let's just bring it up. Okay, we have here John's Firewood. They have fixed costs of $10,000 a month, and I'm going to be making a note of these amounts. We sell each cord of wood for $200, and we have a total of $80 of variable cost. And they tell us that initially we expect to sell 200. So the X number of units we expect to sell are going to be 200. They ask us for the break-even point, then they ask us for a couple of different scenarios. So the part B is what happens if the selling price goes up by 10%, but the volume goes down by 5%. So this is part B, selling price up 10%, X goes down by 5%. The next thing they ask us for is if we spend additional $2,000 on advertising, and this expects us to sell an extra 50 units, is this a good idea? And then finally they say if they drop the selling price to $160 a cord, but they don't even out the lengths, which saves them $20 in variable costs, and they still sell the same number, is this a good idea? Okay, so before we go and look at these on the board, let's look at number D. Okay, so we're going to drop the selling price by $40. We're going to save $20 on variable costs. So what's the effect on our contribution? Well, we lose 40, we gain 20. So we are losing a net amount of 20. So if we're losing 20, but we're not selling any more units, clearly this is not going to be a good idea. And you can go and do the maths, put in the new selling price, put in the new variable costs, keep the number of units sold as 200, and the fixed cost is the same, and you'll see that the profit would go down from our initial level. Okay, I'm going to switch over and go through A, B, and C on the screen now. So let's go look at A, B, and C. A wants to know the break-even point. So A is the break-even point. And we know the formula, fixed cost over selling price minus variable costs. So our fixed cost is 10,000, our selling price is 200. Our variable cost is 80. So we're going to have 10,000 divided by 120. Which is 83. Okay, so that's pretty good. So as long as they are selling 200 batches of or cords of wood, as they call it, they are doing fine. In fact, it would probably be useful to know what the current profit is. So if we look at our equation, we have 200 minus 80 multiplied by 200 batches, subtract the $10,000 of fixed cost. Our current level of profit is actually very significant. It's $14,000 per month, assuming I have all the data correct here from our particular problem. Okay, so now if our current profit is $14,000 a month, they have given us part B and part C to say, what happens if we change a couple of variables? How will that impact our current profit? So let's go and look at B. What happens is the selling price goes up by 10%. So how do you do that? You can multiply that by 1.1. In my head, that's just 220. The variable cost stays the same, but the units goes down by 5%. How do you do that? I will multiply that by 1 minus 0.05, or multiply it by 0.95, which I can see is going to be 190. I subtract the 10,000, and let's go and look at our new profits. We've got 220 minus 80 times 190. And so actually the profit goes to 16,600. So that clearly would be better than the initial situation. Now part C, you have to assume that we're looking back and comparing that and contrasting that against the original position. It gets complicated if you stack a couple of these on top of each other. So what happens here is we have the original position, but we spend $2,000 on advertising, which enables us to sell 50 cords more. So this goes to 250. But if we look at our fixed costs are going to go up by 2,000 because advertising is a fixed cost. So we want to go look at the impact on this. Without doing the calculation, we got $50 times 120. What is 50 times 120? That's 6,000, and we're only spending 2,000 more in advertising, so our profit's going to go up by 4,000. So let's go and do the maths though. We have got 200 minus 80, which is the 120, times 250 minus 12,000, and as we suspected, the profit goes up to 18,000. Okay, so would this be a good idea? Absolutely, this would be a good idea. So what we just looked at here is a couple of examples. I'm going to just bring up the notes again. We looked at example 1. If you go through example 2, it's basically identical, except your fixed costs are different and your selling price and variable costs are different, but it's the same general idea. And in our next little video, what we will do is we'll go and look at a couple of more advanced situations where we use the principles of variable costing to kind of figure out what's happening. So at that point, I'm going to say goodbye, and we'll see you in the next meeting.